All right, we will get started. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the last webinar of this calendar year of the Professional Development Town Hall Series. This is a series sponsored by the AAST Associate Membership, SCCPDS, as well as East. My name is Navpreet Dhillon. I'm a second-year fellow at the R. Adams Colley Shock Trauma Center at the University of Maryland, and I will be your moderator for this event. Today, we will be discussing the job hunt, looking for your first job, or transitioning to a new one. Really quickly, we'll be going over the agenda for this evening in this program, and then after that, we'll meet our speakers and see what they have to say. So to start off, we'll introduce our speakers, and then we'll be talking about exploring jobs in the academic setting, community jobs, locums, how to transition jobs, followed by approximately a 10-minute Q&A in which you guys will be able to answer your most burning questions. So without further ado, we will introduce our speakers. First, we'll have Dr. Alexander Schwed, who did his training over at Harbor and UCLA. He then went to Denver Health, the University of Colorado, for his fellowship training, and he is currently an assistant professor of surgery at Harbor UCLA Medical Center. Then we'll hear from Dr. Carlos Palacio, who did his residency and both his fellowship at Baylor College of Medicine, and currently is an attending at South Texas Health System clinics. Next, we'll then hear from Dr. Katherine Kelley, who did her residency at Eastern Virginia Medical Center and is also a shock trauma alum. She's currently an attending at Crozer Health. And last but not least, we'll have Dr. Chrissy Guidry, who did her residency at Cleveland Clinic and her fellowship at LA County USC. She's currently an assistant professor of surgery at Tulane University. So with that being said, without further ado, we will have Dr. Schwed share his slides and get the evening going.
Sure thing. Hey, everybody. Thanks to the moderator for the invitation and to East and AAST and SCCPDS. I'm going to talk about finding an academic job. So I have a couple disclosures. Much of this is my own personal experience. There just really isn't a whole lot of data. I looked, there's some great papers that look at the experience of colorectal surgical fellowship graduates and a lot about endocrine surgery and are there jobs for endocrine surgeons? So if anyone's interested in researching this, hit me up. My contact details are on the last slide because I think there's a little bit of a dearth of data. And I'm friendly with some of the people who asked me to be on this panel, but I think my only real qualification is that I've had 2 academic jobs in the last 3 years, and I'll talk a little bit about my job search process and sort of how that went down. I think that it's important that we sort of think about, before we dive into this, sort of what is an academic job. So I think almost everybody who's probably in the audience on this talk has been a surgical resident, has been a fellow, or is a fellow, and the bulk of your experience in terms of looking at your faculty are going to be people who have what I would consider to be an academic job. And that's this idea that you have a clinical domain and a non-clinical domain, which is true of many jobs. And that non-clinical domain is either research, teaching, or administration, or all three. But that what's maybe unique about academic jobs is that your promotion and your advancement are reliant on both your clinical and your non-clinical metrics. And this idea of being a part of a residency training program, a medical school, or both. For example, I work at a county hospital in Los Angeles, but I am a UCLA faculty member. And so for me, for my professional development, promotion, and advancement, some of that is tied to being a part of a larger university system. It's also, I think, really important to understand, and our other panelists, I think, will speak to this, what an academic job is not. And an academic job is not the only way to interact with learners. It's not the only way to work somewhere busy or to work at a level 1 center. It's not the only way to do research or participate in research. So those are sort of what an academic job is not. There are lots of great things about having an academic job. I love being part of a community of scholars. I have medical students, PA students, surgical residents. I have residents from other services who rotate on the trauma and surgical critical care services. We have a fellowship here at Harbor UCLA. I love those interactions with all those learners. That's really restorative for me. I love that there are opportunities for research and collaboration. And to some degree, I'm lucky that I have the resources of a larger university and both faculty resources in terms of collaboration and learning from other people, but also the larger infrastructure. But there are some things that are not great about academic jobs. So you can't really choose your team. My father-in-law is obsessed with this idea of like that we scrub with whoever the scrub tech is. It's not like the trauma scrub tech necessarily. Sometimes expectations and reality may not align. Again, not unique to academic jobs. I think one thing is that, people have a lot of potential non-clinical or research hopes and dreams, and the workload, the actual service obligation, whether that's service weeks or call or the service lines that your hospital provides, those might be in conflict. The human capital needs to be spent to provide services for the hospital. So not every person is going to have a job where you just have hours and hours to sit in your office and think the great thoughts about, the future of American surgery. In general, I would say compensation for academic jobs tends to be lower than non-academic jobs. David Spain gave a talk when I was a fellow. He said something along the lines of, when you've seen one system, you've seen one system. So take that with a grain of salt, but in general, that tends to be true. This talk is all about how to find an academic or how to find a job. I'm supposed to talk about how to find an academic job. So my take-home messages for you are mentors, 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 mentors. You already have a professional network, even if you're only a surgical resident. And there are things like job boards and job fairs, and those are great. But in general, I would say my lived experience, and I bet a lot of people on this call are going to see this in the future, is that a lot of it is sort of getting to know people, reaching out to who you know. So I want to talk very briefly about how I found my first job. So I did a 2-year fellowship at Denver. At the very beginning of my second year, which was August of 2019, I sat down with Dr. Berlew, who is a mentor of mine. She's amazing. And we did some soul searching. I sort of talked to her about kind of what she thought might be good for me and sort of what opportunities she knew about. Did a little bit of strategizing about sort of how I could sell myself. I'm a really passionate clinician educator, so sort of how to package that or sell that to places that I would look for a job. But the other thing that she did that was huge was worked with me for both in-person and email introductions. And basically my own sort of schema was sort of the AAST meeting to the East meeting was sort of my, debutante ball season, to use a not very good analogy. So at AAST in 2019, it's in Dallas, and I did all of this furious like speed dating, and I had like 10 coffee dates, and really meeting people, getting introduced to people, getting your name out there. I also did that at the clinical congress. I would say for people who are looking for a trauma acute care surgery job, that meeting tends to be much larger and more overwhelming and not necessarily as high yield. It just so happened that some of the jobs that I was looking at, they were going to have more faculty at that meeting. So that's what I ended up doing. I did a whole series of Zoom and in-person interviews that fall and winter. I did some second looks in the late midwinter into 2020, and then made my decision to go to my former institution around Valentine's Day of 2020. And unfortunately, within a few weeks of starting my job, which was, I started September 15th, 2020, it was pretty clear that it wasn't maybe going to be a great fit. And I was just totally gutted. Like, I was like, I'm a failure. I'm so dumb. Like, I couldn't read the tea leaves, but I reached out to my mentors. So like, take home point number one. So Dr. Berlew, Dr. Coleman, Dr. Parachi, who's also Denver faculty. And then one of my current partners and someone I've always considered a friend, Dr. Angie Neville, who was my program director for my last 2 years of residency. She actually asked me to be on a panel at the clinical congress in 2021. And the planning for that meeting is like, months, if not years in advance. So this was sort of around like November, December of 2020. And I was like, I am in a bad way. I need a new job. So I actually applied for this job that I have now that summer of 2021. I had a Zoom meeting with all of my old faculty, which felt like a reunion. And then they flew me out in October, and I was like, this is a waste of LA County taxpayer dollars because there's no way I'm going to get this job. And they offered it to me, and I said, oh my God, yes, thank you so much. And so I started back here in July. So what did I learn? Mentors, mentors, mentors. So I applied for a job where I went to medical school, and I actually reached out to Dr. Carrie Sims, who was a mentor of mine when I was a medical student. And I had not talked with Dr. Sims in honestly like 4 or 5 years. Like, I'd seen her briefly at a couple of the meetings. I basically wrote her not a cold email, but like a, hey, not sure you remember me, but I'm applying for this job. I know that you're leaving Penn, but I wanted to reach out. And within like 30 minutes, she had like texted my cell phone and been like, of course I remember you. We need a phone date. We need to talk. And that actually led to me applying for a job at the Ohio State University, which was awesome. A little bit random. I'm not from Ohio. My wife was like, we can only go to New York or Los Angeles. That's where our families are. But it was great. To my second point, apply broadly. And if you can, and I think in the Zoom era, I think to some degree we can, interview broadly. So it teaches you your worth. It shows you different ways of being employed. It shows you different systems. It puts your name out there. And I don't think it's disingenuous. You know, there are people who are lifelong, have been at an institution for the entirety of their career, but I bet if you ask them at certain junctions in their development and promotion, they looked other places, if only to sort of take that back as a negotiating chip or to learn more about kind of what those current opportunities looked like. Keep an open mind. Again, the Ohio State University, I was like, Columbus is really nice, and Jenny's ice cream, this is delicious. Do not fall in love with the first person who offers you a job. I'm not sure I made that mistake, but I did actually end up taking that first job. And some of it was that like, they were really slick. They were like, you're great. Here's a contract. And I was like, you want to pay me how much money to do this job? Like, are you crazy? Take a beat, think about it. I think one thing that I didn't do that I should have maybe done more of was sort of get more collateral information. Like, you will be surprised how many people you know. And then just like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, you know people who know people. Take that with a grain of salt, right? You know, people leave jobs for all kinds of reasons. People say things that aren't maybe true or won't be true for you. But I think it really behooves you to, whatever job you take, like put feelers out, you know, talk to your PD, talk to your mentors, talk to your professional network. And those are my tips. Those are my emails. You can send me a text, or I'm trying to not be such a geriatric millennial. You can DM me on Twitter. But I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to the hearing from our other panelists, but also to the Q&A session. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schwed. And I think you just really attest to the power of mentorship with your talk. Next up, we have Dr. Palacio.
All righty, so let me get this going here. So let's share. Everybody sees my slides there?
Perfect.
Did it went good now or no?
Or actually defaulted to the other view. If you can just
What
screen
about
share
that?
again. Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much to WST, to EAST for the organization of this and the opportunity to be here, Dr. Dhillon for moderating this session. So as I was introduced, I'm actually an IMG. I'm from Colombia, and I did my training in Houston at Baylor College of Medicine. You have there in the map where I train, and I ended up right there at the Texas-Mexico border in a place or in a town called McAllen. And the only reason why I'm here is because under the program I came into training to the US, I had to serve 3 years in an underserved area, and this is where I ended up. So I was, like Alex mentioned, I was mostly I saw what it was an academic job. I didn't have any idea about a community job when I started this journey, and most of this is just my experience. It's not nothing that we can find on data, so I have nothing to disclose. So similar to Alex or what he mentioned, to me the main thing is just networking, knowing people. Actually, my current job, I found it through a classmate that told me, hey, I interview at this place, and it helps with the underserved area job that you're looking. Why don't you go and check it out? And that's how I ended up here. It was not even because it was on a web page or anything. So networking, coworkers and friends, it really, really helps. Job fairs, I know the organizations, both organizations, they have different job fairs that you can find some of the jobs that are posted in there. Websites, they don't pay me to say this, but I actually got a profile on that website. It's kind of a sketchy to say the least, but it actually has good offers in there that I was impressed when I was checking it out. I was like, wow, they flew me. Where they were mostly useful for underserved areas. So those IMGs in the call that will help, and they have for everything. It's not only for my IMGs, and of course meetings. I was actually pleased to see the gather that WST had on the Congress at the meeting. It was really nice to see who was looking for a job, who was offering a job. So those are the different ways you can find them, similar to academia. So let's talk a little bit about a community. So tips. First of all, you need to hire a lawyer. you need an employment attorney. It's not the one that you're gonna find that somewhere else, or it's not your regular attorney. You need an employment attorney, and it needs to be from the state that you're practicing, or that you're looking to practice. Texas, for instance, it's its own country within the United States, so you really want to get someone that it's practice in Texas. Don't hire the one from Georgia or the one from California. So always try to get the one from the state you're going to practice. Everything is negotiable, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it and what everything means, because everybody kept telling me everything, and I was like, what do you mean by that? So we're going to talk about that in a bit. You want to make sure you're covered for your malpractice. And of course, you want to make sure that you have a tail. And what does tail means? It means that when you finish that job, 3 years, 5 years, or whatever your term is, you're going to have coverage for at least 2 years in case you face a suit. So that job or that employer is going to pay you, for that, for what it means, your tail. Are you going to be employed by a hospital? And what I mean by that is by a healthcare group. It doesn't need to be by the hospital. Are you going to be at a group, which is physician practice? How many people are going to be in that group? Are you going to have coverage when you're out of town? Because that's very important. The hospital is going to require for somebody to cover when you're not there. And of course, what is that notice that you're going to give? Is it going to be 2 weeks? Is it going to be 90 days? For the most part, they put a 90-day notice from both parties. Agreement terms. So how many years are you going to work in there? Are you going to do 3 years? Most of the corporations, they do 3 to 5 year terms. And of course, after that, you can do auto renewal for 1 year period. So those are terms that you can negotiate as well. And what type of practice? I'm going to assume that most of the people in the call are in academia, and in academia, you do all that in some practices, but in the community is a little bit different. Sometimes you have general surgeons that they just practice general surgery. Some other, they do acute care, ICU and trauma, and a combination of both. Some of them is only ICU and trauma. So you have to ask those questions. What is the kind of practice I'm going to do? Some systems like the one that I work with, they have general surgeons and they round on their patients only. They don't have morning reports. So those are things that you have to ask every time you're going to go for your interview. Let's talk a little bit about the negotiation part. So there is something called the MGMA, which is basically the Medical Group Management Association. And this assists with physician practices. So every year they send a survey and they assess for physician compensation by specialty. This report that I have here is a report from 2022, but it's based on data from 2021. So what goes into these numbers? You can see the median here for a trauma job is $500,000, but don't open your eyes, because a lot of information goes into that $500,000, and that's total compensations, RVU generated, an average compensation factor, and an average collection. So a contract that is only base salary, no compensation at all, these numbers, they make sense. They are helpful as you as a physician to know what could be your best salary in your specific area. The issue with the MGMA is that it's also broken by regions. You have the Eastern, you have the Midwest, Southwest, and Western. This is the average for the whole nation. And it's also divided in physician-owned practices and healthcare networks. Don't base your job only on this. This is just a reference for your compensation package. This is not the only thing you can negotiate. So don't think that, oh my goodness, I see this number, I'm going to go by $500,000. It doesn't work that way. For instance, that salary that you see there, you have to produce at least 6,000 RVUs to make that amount. So don't negotiate only on this, based on this number. Other items that you can negotiate is your relocation, or if you want to switch jobs, then your retention bonus, your RVU bonuses, and we're going to talk on RVU basis on the next slide. Number of call days, let's say that they offer you, well, you have to be on call 15 days. You might say, no, I just want to be on call 14 days. And anything after that goes into the extra payments. How much are they going to pay you for that extra payment? So all that is negotiable. Your non-compete, very important. Make sure it's very specific. Some corporations, they tell you, okay, well, going to have a non-compete for the region, or you're going to have a non-compete for the whole city. You're going to have a non-compete for the county. So make sure, my advice for you is make it at miles, make it very, very specific if you're going to have a non-compete. You can negotiate that as well. And of course, try to get a contract that is easy to bail, and your lawyer or your attorney is going to help you. Now, remember, the attorney is going to get you that contract that is easy to bail, but you decide about the call days, you decide about RVU bonuses, you decide about your relocation or your retention bonus. So those are things that the lawyer might not have idea. So other items that you can discuss. So let's talk a little bit about your RVUs and your collection. So let's say that you receive a contract that is collection based. So that just means that for every dollar that the practice receive, you as a physician are going to get a percentage off. Sometimes it's only 30%. So that's when the MGMA, what I showed you before, it comes handy because it averages, the report has the average of that collection for that specialty. The only caveat with that is that it's volume dependent and of course insurance dependent. So if you're in an area where the mixed payer is mostly uninsured, be very careful if you go into a collection contract, because you're not going to collect that much. And on top of that, if you're only getting 30%, your salary is not going to be as you expected. So be very careful. If we talk about RVU targets, or if you go, let's say, in an RVU, straight RVU contract. So again, the MGMA plays a role, because an RVU is just the RVUs generated by a physician times the compensation factor. And the compensation factor is the dollar amount that you're going to be paid for. So for average, let's say that is $65. So it's easy. Your RVUs, let's say you produce 5,000, you multiply by 65, and then that is your salary. Now, if you're going to have an RVU target as a bonus, you have to be careful, because if they tell you, let's say your RVU bonus for the year is 7,000, your corporation is going to divide that 7,000 over 12. I think that gives you like 580. So every month you have to produce 580 RVUs. And I learned that the hard way. So let's say that one month you produce 400, forget about your bonus, because you're not going to receive it. Even though then another month you produce 800 and you average the 7,000, but if there are several months where you're below that 580, you're not going to get your bonus. Okay, so be very careful with that. If your only RVU target or RVU contract is the number of RVUs time the compensation factor. Some places, they also have a tier RVU. For instance, they'll tell you, if you produce 5,000, then we'll pay you 65 per RVU. If you produce 7,000, they will increase $10, $20. So make sure you also clarify that with them. You can also negotiate your benefits. And of course, that includes your PTO, your holidays, your sick leave days, and of course, your medical and dental insurance. You can also negotiate your licenses, dues, and your CMEs, and how much they pay for travel for going to the meetings. And this is just little items. Again, everybody gets fixated on the salary, but everything is negotiable, and these are the little items that you can negotiate. For me, it's very important having partners. These are just mostly what I learned. Having partners is key. If you don't trust them, then probably you're not a good fit for that job. Talk to people who left that practice. Actually, on Twitter, I saw somebody recommended, hey, ask to go to morning report. And I think that would be great, because you'll see how the dynamic goes. Sometimes they tell you, hey, there is no morning report. You're responsible for your patients 24/7, except on weekends. And is this something that you want to do? So, and also have a 5 to 10 year plan on what you want to do. Please, 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 newly graduates, I know you've been poor for 5-10 years, and now you have this salary of $500,000. please, please, please don't buy your Maserati, don't buy your whatever, don't buy your 10-room home with pool and jacuzzi, because you don't know if you're a good fit. And then a year later, you find out you don't want to stay in that. And guess what? You have to pay back your relocation bonus and you have to pay your tail. And on top of that, you have depth of your medical school, and you have the depth of your luxurious home and your Maserati, your Mercedes, you name it, and you're going to be in trouble financially. So please, please, please don't do that, at least not during the first year. I've seen that mistake made over and over and over, and as physicians, we don't learn about it. So make sure you don't do that. As an IMG, of course, I have, I know how the process is. This is my last slide. I'm gonna touch a little bit about the Conrad 30 program, 30 spots for every IMG that you can stay in the US. Of course, Texas, California, and Florida are the hardest to get, so apply early. In general, if you're doing a 2-year fellowship, you should start applying during your last year of residency. If you have 1-year fellowship, 4th year, start making interviews, networking, etc., etc. So apply early. Obtain a lawyer. Legal counseling is very important. The experience of your employer is also important. In my particular case, I remember my recruiter told me, I have no idea what you need, but the attorneys that we have, they have done it in the past, and there is this number of physicians that they have helped, and it really, it really helps. I have another recruiter that told me, what is it that you need? I have no idea, and you already know I'm not going with you. So very, very important, the experience. And you can negotiate everything. So don't think that because you are an international medical graduate, you don't have the same rights, or because they are gonna process your green card, you should not negotiate anything. You can negotiate everything and anything. Lastly, thank you so much. I'm looking for the Q&A. Talking about partners, I'm very grateful to this group of surgeons that have helped me over the last 5 years, and they keep helping me. So thank you so much, and I'm looking forward for the questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Palacio, for those helpful tips, especially about not buying that Maserati off right off the bat. Next, we'll have Dr. Kelley. Dr. Kelley will tell us all there is to know about locums.
All right, seeing my slides okay? All right, so I did locums for 2 years after finishing fellowship at Shock Trauma in Baltimore. It was certainly a little bit of an atypical path, but I think it gave me a lot of experiences at a variety of centers. So I'll go through some of those pros and cons. So first, some of you may not have heard of locums before, but it's locum tenens, and it's temporary work assignments. It varies a lot depending on what specialty you're doing, kind of how it's set up. But in the trauma world, and mostly for surgery, it tends to be, a weekend to a week per month where you'll go in and help a hospital with kind of their call pool. And so it can be anywhere from, for general surgery, you might cover a smaller hospital and just be the only general surgeon for like 10 days in a row. Or at a busier center, it may just be a weekend. It may be a string of nights somewhere, it may just be days, it may be days and nights. So it's pretty highly varied, but it's typically a weekend to a week, and they want you to come back. And so they want you to be part of their coverage so that, every time somebody goes on vacation or just to fill the call pool regularly, you're always there. And so it's not generally just like a one and done thing. They do want you to return, although you don't have to if you hate the place. It's usually a 30-day notification of not return. The big advantages for locums is the flexibility. You get to say yes or no to any job out there. Now you do have to apply to a bunch and hear back and make commitments, but you get to really control your schedule, and you can say no to anything. You get to travel a lot. We'll get a little bit into the cons as far as where you're traveling to, but it is nice if you enjoy travel. You're traveling a lot for work, but there's also free time in between to travel a lot for fun. You get 1 million rewards points from hotels. Every time I check into a Marriott now, they give me this like special little like cookie or candy thing, and they like welcome me and they give me a little letter and thank me for coming, which makes me feel really special. So that's definitely a perk. You do have probably the highest compensation. All things are negotiable. So you do have to negotiate a little bit for that, but generally you make more as a locums than you would as a otherwise full-time surgeon, depending on how much you work. And then for me, I got to do most of the operations myself, as they were mostly places with PAs rather than residents. And so for me, right out of training, it was nice because I didn't have to worry about letting the resident do the case or the fellow. I could really kind of own what I wanted to do, which I thought was great coming out. The biggest cons is there's a lot of undesirable locations. You know, people need locums because they can't hire somebody. So there's a reason why they can't hire somebody. Sometimes there's a sudden hole they have to fill, a sudden ill partner, or somebody had to go out on leave, and they're just in a transition period. But most of the jobs, there's a reason why. And it's either the location isn't the greatest, and depending on how you feel about different places, I went to a lot of more rural areas, as well as, maybe in the Midwest, maybe colder weathers. It's highly varied. But they weren't as much in like big cities or places that you may want to go on vacation. The care that is done in the hospital or the support you get from APPs or residents varies a lot. I generally went to level 2s, most of which then had either a resident or a PA or NP on all the time, which was sufficient coverage. But I did go to a hospital once where I was on all weekend, and I only had support until like 3 p.m. And then I had to take all the calls and go to the LR, and it was like 48 hours of like no sleep and first page from the floor. And so your support can vary, and so it's something to look into. The operative volumes are pretty highly varied. I think that's the other biggest con for me, is that many of them are not very high, because you're going into a community, maybe you're covering trauma at a center with a low operative volume, or you're covering for a general surgeon who is out of town and they need you to cover, the APPs and the bowel obstructions, but most of their day-to-day is their elective practice, which you won't have. And so I found that as a trauma surgeon, the only places I got enough operations were places where I was also covering emergency general surgery. The other thing is you're not part of an institution. You're not going to get academic support for research. So if that's an interest to you, it's hard to really do anything of your own. It's getting more traction in the wider surgical world, but it still tends to be looked down on by the bigger academic centers, and that can make it harder to, get involved in societies. Potentially can be considered a red flag when you go to apply to a full-time position. And so that's something to consider. I found that I did okay as far as getting a full-time job. You do a lot of networking, you can go to all the meetings and you can meet people. But there's definitely people that are like, why'd you do locums? Are you crazy? And so that's something to consider, especially if you come from a residency or a fellowship that's maybe not as, strongly well-known or has a big network. I trained at shock trauma in Baltimore, so I had a pretty big network to support me when it was time to get a job. But if that's a thing that's hard for you, that this could be a limiting factor to kind of re-enter the world, and especially at the higher academic tiers. You need to get a license in every state you practice in, unless you work for the VA. There is a interstate medical licensure compact that's active for 20-some states, but you can only join that if you live or work primarily in one of the member states. So when I, was a trainee in Maryland, that's how I was able to get it. But now I live in Pennsylvania, so I would not be able to be a member of the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact anymore. But when you have access to it, you don't have to resubmit paperwork to get licenses. You do have to pay the licensure fees, and you generally pay that everywhere you go. But you just kind of can get a turnaround license in, 10 days to 2 weeks to get a license without any additional paperwork. So that's a big advantage if you live in a state that's a member. You also have to pay taxes in every state, or if you're in a state like Pennsylvania, every municipality has individual taxes. So accountants help a lot with that because you don't want to miss out on some state taxes, and it has to be quarterly estimated taxes. So you're paying taxes like all the time to a million places. You also are not an employee, and so you have to get your own health insurance. So as a single person, it wasn't a big deal for me because I didn't have to worry about supporting a family. But if you have a big family that needs benefits, that can be a financial consideration, that there's not going to be benefits associated with the job. The way you kind of get a locums job is there's a bunch of different locums agencies out there. They vary in the number of jobs they have access to. Some of them are bigger and can really give a whole nationwide search. Some of them, I think, pay you better. In general, when you get a job offer, technically the pay scale is negotiable, although I have not had a lot of luck with that personally. But I think it's like, if the job you really want it, you may not negotiate the salary, but in general, you should be able to. The locums agencies will make and pay for all your travel arrangements, which is really great because, if I had a delayed flight, I would just call my guy and he would like make another flight arrangement, maybe on a different airline, maybe book me a hotel somewhere, but whatever. I didn't have to do any of it. So that's the advantage of going through an agency, and they oftentimes will reimburse things like your licensure fees in a given state. The other way to get jobs is just word of mouth. So pay people that they'll know you do locums, and they'll say, oh, we're looking for a locum surgeon. Like, would you be interested in our hospital? And so that's how I got about half of my positions were through an agency, and the other half were through word of mouth. Some of them, when I then did word of mouth, I was responsible for my own transportation or lodging, but usually I would take that into account and get paid a higher rate. So it's just something to think about when you're doing it that way. The other big considerations are your retirement savings. And so you're not attached to a hospital that's going to put money away for you, but you can set up something called a SEP IRA or an independent 401k and put aside up to like $56,000 a year of your 1099 income. And so that's important to set up and do early if you're going to do this. You can set up an LLC, which can be financially protective and important, but there are a lot of pros and cons to that vary by state. And so it's important to talk to an accountant before you go ahead with that. You do need also a case log. Every job isn't going to give you privileges unless you can show what operations you've done. So you need to keep that up to date. And while if you're at a institution, you can sometimes have them run like your operative report as an attending. If you're at 10 institutions, nobody's going to be able to really do that for you. So I use the College of Surgeons SSR, and that worked pretty well. And there's even a function where you can say what hospital you were at, and you can enter whatever hospitals you're working in. And so I found that helpful, not only to track going forward, but also to enable me to see like, oh, what kind of cases was I getting at this hospital? What kind of, how busy was I here? And really try to decide which jobs I wanted to go back to or not. So those are kind of the big things about locums. I really loved it. I thought it was great for me as a way to really explore different types of environments, different places to work. Before I was, ready to choose a full-time job, I worked everywhere from critical access hospitals up through level 1. And I think I have a much better understanding of what jobs are like now at all different centers. And when I get transfers in or I need to transfer out, I really understand the system better. And then I forgot to put it in the cons, but the other biggest con is the lack of like mentorship. And so if you're the kind of person that wants a senior partner, you can ask for help. You don't usually have that most of the locums places. So I got all my mentorship remotely. I definitely would text or call Joe DeBose and Jose Diaz. And I had a great network that I could get remote mentoring, but I didn't have a lot of in-person. And so you have to know yourself to know whether it's really something to do. But I do think it's good, either as in before your first job, or if you get that first job and you hate it and you need something to kind of tide you over, it can be a really good alternative. And here's my contact information for any other questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You've did a fantastic job of not only introducing to us, I mean, as a trainee, I know a little bit of locums, but not too much, but not only introducing the concept, but really walking us through kind of the nitty-gritty stuff that I think everyone needs to know. Next, we had Dr. Guidry, who will be talking about how to transition between jobs.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for having us. I'm just going to get right to it. And I just noticed like my backdrop is like flipped. So I don't know how I did that, but that was not purposeful. It wasn't my skill. But anyway, I'm going to talk about how to transition jobs. I've done a lot of transitions in my own job in the last few years, and I'm happy to talk to someone offline about that. But I am now the director of well-being for GME at Tulane, but also the APD for the residency as well. So first, I just want to, kind of get down to the nitty gritty of, when you're transitioning jobs, I think it's really important to look into what's your purpose in life. If you have a phone or you have like a fancy way to do it with Preview, like please take a picture of this and really like think about it, meditate on it later, and think about these different spheres and your little Venn diagram of your jobs. Is this new job that you're looking at giving you a chance to find your true purpose? The little purpose is this little yellow dot in the middle here. You have your little legend to tell you that. And it really, you really want to ask yourself these questions. Ask yourself, what am I doing? Do I love this? What are my strengths in this? And I kind of grade this part out here because when you start to think about it more, what I get paid for is, that should come with the things. If you're doing what you love and you're doing what your strengths are and you're doing what the world needs, the money will follow. I wouldn't put that as like your number one priority when you're looking for a job and your purpose in it. I really encourage you to practice, and for people who are in their first jobs already and you're looking for a transition to a next job, I really encourage you to practice what's called savoring. And when you do savoring, that means you don't just savor with food, right? So you can savor on a particular task you did, whether it's with a resident or whether it's teaching or on a community project or a QI project. Think about something in your recent past where you really had this like aha part of your career or your job, and you were like, wow, that really got me. Like, I feel so fulfilled. If you're like me, you're like in tears whenever this happens, because you're like, wow, that was so nice. That felt so good. I really encourage you, when you're thinking about transitioning jobs, think about those little nuggets that were so good for you and think about how it fits into this Venn diagram. I say that because, you want to look for that in the job that you're going to take. And if your current job is not having that, and really, I say this, you can't and shouldn't want it all. Like, you can't do it all. You can't, teach the residents, medical students, committees, quality improvements, research, advocacy, community, like that's how you're going to get burnout. And we don't want you doing that. So really think about, savor on that, that part of your career and your training or your time as a faculty. And even if you're in your fellowship right now, there's things that you can identify. If it's, really complex cases and you really like the clinical aspect of it, then you're going to have to look for a job that has more clinical time and less research and teaching. So you really want to do that. I will say, I'm trying to get to there we go. When you're thinking about transitioning your jobs, I wanted to put a plug here to say, you really want to consider things like, oops, I think I just pressed on, like, what are you going to leave? So, for instance, retirement plans. I work 2/8 at the VA. And if I'm at the VA for so many years, then I have retirement plans that are going to kick in whenever I'm at this minimal retirement age. Also healthcare benefits. Some institutions out there, if you stay with them for X amount of years, then you get healthcare benefits after you retire. And not a lot of people know that. Especially the VA is like this. But some places, I have friends that, working 20 years at an institution will give you healthcare benefits for life. Malpractice insurance. You need to think about if you're, as Dr. Kelley mentioned about locums, if you're going to be taking locums, you don't have malpractice insurance. You kind of take that for granted when you're a resident and a fellow, is that's covered whenever you're at a big institution, and that's there. Think about your CME money. I take that for granted when I look at, other jobs, and then especially over the pandemic when our CME money was, shortened a little bit, is that, that CME money paid for a lot of the conferences, transportation, and all that stuff. And that adds up if you're paying that out of your own pocket. And then, you really have to think the logistics of, what does your contract say? Like how many days notice you have to give them? Can you be on, what your vacation times, you get that money paid back, and etc. So when you find another job and it seems to be in alignment with your purpose, and you've gone through the Venn diagram, remember that the grass is not always greener on the other side. You could think that, oh, this job looks so good, they're paying all this kind of money, it seems like it's in line. But you really have to take that into consideration, is that sometimes jobs are not always greener on the other side. So I really really encourage you, look at the Venn, trust your intuitions and about this upcoming opportunity, and really make a list. And, and I'll just go to this slide here, is like, when you talk to your boss, come with that list. And, you want to stay very professional about it. You want to say, I'm at this current job. I thank you so much for this opportunity, but here's the things that are in my Venn diagram. And you don't have to say Venn diagram, obviously, but you say, like, here's what I love to do, X. Here's my strengths. I'm really good at doing wellness stuff. Here's what the world needs. They need less burnout and more wellness. And here's what I'm getting paid for. Not getting paid that much for it. So here's this other opportunity. And maybe those 4 things really align together, and you can do those 4 things and find your purpose with your calling and get paid for it. So, it's you got to take the personal things out of it when you're talking to your boss. And you really have to be like, I really appreciate the opportunity you have for me here and the things that I've done, but I've found this other opportunity. It checks these boxes for me, and I really would love to, have this as an opportunity for my career advancement. Now, I will say, speaking of the emotional intelligence, you got to expect that there may be some conflict in that conversation. That's not an easy conversation to have, and you have to really prepare yourself for that. And honestly, whenever I know that I'm going to be in a difficult situation where there's going to be conflict, I rehearse those things out loud, and the way I'm going to respond, and the way my heart's going to race, and the way my palms are going to get sweaty. If you do that before you have the conversation, then you can almost kind of grin and smile, and because you have that already in your mind as a plan to how you're going to react. Some of the common things that you may see is, they may negotiate, your boss may negotiate with you and say, oh, well, well, what if we give you, 50 grand more a year or something, and they want to add, we'll give you more days off or something. really spell out in your mind, what's your non-negotiables? Okay, like if they say they're going to pay me $500,000 a year, maybe I'll stay. You may be like Carlos and make all that, community money. But you may say no, like no dollar amount is going to change my mind. I only want to work 4 call shifts a month. Okay. So if they say that, like, will that really change what your decision is? So make your non-negotiables before you go in. And really it comes down to, at the end, they may say, well, and this is the bad talks about other opportunities. They may say, oh, well, that place is no good. They're not going anywhere, and they could bad talk it. Well, again, this is like pulling in that EQ and that emotional intelligence and be like, look, I appreciate your concerns, but this is what I feel like is best for me at the moment. So really preparing for this and having your EQ, I think will get you having a good conversation with your boss, and really just going back to that slide here, your Venn diagram of what you really want, what you love, what your strengths are, what the world needs, and what I get paid for. And really, this is one of my last slides. Is I laugh at this as most bosses are really aware if you're thinking about or making that change. They can see in you if you're unhappy and you're looking around. And really, surgeons, your bosses, they want the best for you. And they have, they don't have the same purpose as you on your Venn diagram. So do it. Like, trust yourself, trust your intuitions, and take it as an opportunity for grow and really getting the opportunity to find your purpose in life. So that's pretty much all I have. And I'll just give a little shout out to my boss's boss, Dr. Kalaki. She's our chair, and thanks so much. And there's my email if you have any questions for me. And I think we have just a few minutes to do our Q&A. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Dr. Guidry. I definitely took a screenshot of that Venn diagram and I've put it in my records. All right, so now we have the Q&A. There are 2 ways to kind of get your questions across. Number 1, you can either use the Q&A function on Zoom, or alternatively on the other way would be to raise your hand using that Zoom button. And if you do, Ms. Bria Sanders will promote you. We ask that you then unmute yourself and share your video. So please go ahead and ask your questions. We do have 2 questions for our lovely panelists. The first question is, and this is kind of more geared for some of you guys, is there still room to negotiate the terms of a contract and salary for a first job at a large health system or academic center?
I think the answer is yes. Like Carlos before was saying, everything is negotiable. For academic jobs specifically, I think it's important to realize that very often you are part of a larger pay structure. So for example, at my former position, I was a university faculty member. And if you think about it, a tenure track professor of philosophy makes a very different salary than a trauma surgeon. One of the many ways that universities sometimes get around that is that you'll max out, like one part of your salary will be your university salary line, and that's often the very highest group of salaries. But then there's some sort of other pay structure that makes up for that difference, sort of to the Carlos's point about the MGMA data set. The other thing being like every place is different. So for example, like I am an academic trauma surgeon, I am paid by Los Angeles County. So I will tell you that my salary was not negotiable. It's like you were hired at like, this is basically how long you've been working. This is the track that you're on. This is what the salary is. Some of the like less tangible things are sometimes negotiable. And certainly depending on where you're being recruited. Because again, remember, like when you are invited for a job interview at this stage in your career, you are being actively recruited by that employer. Every place is going to be different. So I think the simple answer is yes. I think the specific answer for like large university health systems is that the salary and often the benefits are not necessarily negotiable, but maybe some of the things about what my call schedule looks like or what the expectations are for productivity or support for research, those might be negotiable.
Awesome. Does anyone else have anything else to say? Dr. Guidry, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just say too, even for locums, I actually do a little bit of locums as well. And locums is very negotiable. But for an academic institution, I feel like I'm at Tulane right now and it's negotiable. Every year we have our contracts that we sign and we negotiate our contract. I would say don't just like go in there with like a random number, obviously, but take the data that's out there and the benchmarks out there and then talk to not only those numbers, but then some of the colleagues, the associate membership, I'm happy to share data points on what some of the colleagues that I know of trauma surgeons that are getting paid, just to really help support you and really have some evidence to give you, when you go to that meeting.
Awesome. So we have a question next probably for Dr. Kelley and also for Dr. Guidry, if you guys can help. So with locums, it's a little bit about the credentialing process. Obviously, it's not easy when you go to these places. And I think irrespective of where you go, credentialing is always a very long thing. Can you guys comment about your experiences, how much time you need to kind of facilitate all of that?
The slowest part is actually getting your state license. And so for me, I kind of reached out to some locums agencies about 6 months before I was getting started. And we talked about where I wanted to be and the fact that I was in a state with the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact. So I got 1 or 2 licenses in states that were not part of that I would be interested in working in. Pennsylvania is chief amongst them because my family was there. And then I applied for that interstate medical licensure. And they did that a couple months in advance. And then they kind of started reaching out to jobs, maybe at about the 4-month range. And the credentialing, actually, the agencies will help fill in a lot of your paperwork, which is nice. But yeah, so maybe like less than 6 months probably would be the timeline.
Yeah, I would say my process was very easy. I just go to one hospital in North Carolina. So, but I got credentialed at 7 different atrium hospitals because they're all in the same system. I didn't have to fill out multiple paperwork everywhere. So it was really fast. And yeah, the licensing was just the hardest thing and the longest thing. But that for me wasn't more than, I can't remember, like 2 or 3 months. So it didn't seem like it took that long at all.
And I was doing mine early COVID, which might have slowed a lot of stuff down.
Let's see. So I actually have a question. So, most of the folks on this line are trainees, myself included. And a lot of us kind of grow up in these institutions from, residency and fellowship that are often in academic institutions. How, when you're looking for your first job, you may or may not gravitate towards one thing, academics or this and that, but how do you know that, going to the community practice is kind of the right thing for you? Doing locums is the right thing for you, especially if you haven't been in a setup where you've been exposed to those types of environments.
I would just say you may not know. It's hard to know. If you have some opportunities to do away rotations, I would highly recommend it, especially for the residents. When you have the time during your chief year, like go do an away somewhere in a smaller, community hospital. Even if you don't want to do it, it'll give you some appreciation for that type of practice. And then again, someone mentioned, you get familiar with how the process works if they transfer things to you. So, like, okay, this is definitely something I don't want to do. Then, you've exited off of your list. That to me, that's a great way to do it while you have the flexibility as a resident to still do it.
Yeah, I mean, in my own case, I can tell you that I wanted an academic job, but I landed in this community because of my visa situation, right? I had to go to an underserved area. And believe it or not, otherwise I would have stayed in a big academic center like anybody else. And actually, I'm loving it. In fact, I do miss academia. I create this sort of hybrid model in which right now we have residents and we're now an ACS verified level 1 trauma center. But again, it's very, very weird to find something like this. Most of the community jobs is just work, general surgery, trauma, ICU, no residents, MPs, PAs, and there is people that like that, but you have to be exposed to it. So maybe locums, if you're in an academic job and you want to do some locums, you might be able to get that exposure. The same thing, for instance, the cases. When I landed into my job, I'm doing trauma ICU and a little bit of general surgery, but some other places is just plain general surgery. So that's very important, knowing that division of the different sort of subspecialties that you can go into.
Great. We have another question in the Q&A. Not sure if this was discussed already, but are there publicly available lists or resources to benchmark salaries, both academic and community? I think Dr. Palacio, if you want to quickly summarize what you had said before.
Yeah, MGMA is what most community hospitals uses, and now they are not public. You have to pay. That's the only problem. Some of the recruiters will have it, so try to make some friends with the recruiters, and they will give it to you. But they're not public, unfortunately. Sometimes if you Google it, you'll find like the ones from 2019, 2018, and you might be able to find it that way. You'll get an idea. Okay, well, inflation might take me to this point. This is what I'm going to negotiate. Actually, the one that I show you, it was the recruiter for my corporation. I had to like bend her arm and tell, you're giving me this so I can show it. But so they're not, unfortunately, they're not.
In California, all university salaries are publicly disclosed through a website called Transparent California. So if you Google me or anyone, you can figure out how much money I make. Carlos sort of spoke to this, though. I think it's important to realize that like that number is a number, and it doesn't really actually tell you like the pay structure or like what overtime pay means, for example, or what other pay means, or like what does it mean that some people get more paid out benefits, things like that. But if in terms of like having a sense, often for universities, they are publicly disclosed, or at least the range. And there are even job listings that will sometimes say, we are part of the University of wherever, and our projected, based on your experience, what our projected salary range is between X and Y, to give you a sense of sort of where your potential future employer is coming from.
I'm sure there's going to be a lot of Googling after this. All right, we have another question. I
was just going to add the AAMC, I believe, is the resource that publishes the physicians of each specialty's data in a book. And I know at our institution specifically, that book is a secret hiding place is in the library, and the library actually has this book. And you can use that as a tool to say, and it shows, the quartiles too, and you say like, okay, if you're giving me a bonus based on my productivity in the 75th percentile, then are you paying me in the 75th percentile according to this, trauma surgeon area? The answer is probably no. So, like that's how you negotiate in that and use that book. And so maybe it's at the library.
You're making us go to the library.
Yeah. The same thing happened with the MGMA. Like your salary, that $500,000, you have to produce 6,000 RVUs. So if you want to be on the 75th or 95th percentile, you probably have to go 10,000 above and produce all that, so that you can negotiate and tell them, hey, this is what I produce. I deserve this raise based on the amount of RVUs that I produce.
I think our next question is for Dr. Kelley. Did you have trouble? Sorry, let me pull up the question again. Did you have trouble getting a job doing locums for 2 years? I think you had kind of mentioned that, but I don't know if you know other people that were in similar circumstances that you can comment on.
Yeah, I felt like I didn't have trouble getting the jobs that I ended up going for, which I decided that I kind of liked the community academic hybrid. So I'm at an institution now with residents and medical students, but not actually at a full academic center. I think that had I been aiming for a true, really academic job, the Penns of the world where you need to have like a big research plan and things like that. I don't think that would work very well coming straight out of locums, because I haven't really been doing research for 2 years, and that's like one of the things that the major, academic centers really look for. And so it kind of depends on what you're going into a little bit.
Awesome. So again, just a reminder to use either the raise hand function or the Q&A for questions. I do have a question. So one thing that I personally noticed, kind of personally being on the job hunt, is I feel like I'm becoming aware of the different timelines that different institutions have that I'm interviewing. So some of them are very eager to hire because, budgets and this and that. And then some of them are kind of filling in a spot, that they're just looking for the right person. So, they're taking their time, and some of them are kind of in between, and they kind of fall around the spectrum. How do you kind of strategize things, negotiate things, kind of go about dealing with that? So for example, if there's a place that's really pressuring you to commit one way or another, but there's another place that, you were invited to interview, but haven't quite interviewed yet, how do you kind of reconcile all of that?
I think if the place really wants you, they're going to wait. So, I would just be honest, and just say, like, hey, look, there's a lot of boxes that you check. You filled my Venn diagram so lovely. But I just want to make sure I don't get, something more from another place. And, you can blame it on, I just want to be true to myself. I want to be true to the people that train me, that I'm getting the best job that I know is out there. And I do feel like, exhausting my interview places will give me the best idea. And you can always say, I just want to make sure that, your place is the best for me. And I think that helps me to see other places that don't check my boxes, so I can compare them and find your place to be all those good things for me.
I think also Chrissy talked about this, but like I had to give 6 months notice for my last job. And so, I think you're totally spot on. I think your boss knows. I actually went to my boss and I was like, hello, boss, just so you know, I'm looking for a new job. But everybody in this process is a human. So I think it's totally reasonable to say, thank you so much for what's going on here. I know that I need to give you 6 months notice, and I want to be true to that timeline. And that's a great way that you come back to when you're looking for a new job. You say, hey, I'm really sorry. I'm obligated to give at least X months of notice, or like, hey, I think you guys are great. And for family reasons, I'm also looking here, or whatever. Like, everybody in this process is a human being. And I think we all get it that like life is sticky and messy, right? So I think it's all reasonable. Like, I think if I actually think it's a red flag. If someone's like trying to hold you to a timeline that is like, here's this bright, shiny contract, we need to sign it in 2 weeks, I would really look at that a little bit skeptically, right? Like, why are they so desperate? You're great. You're all bright, shiny snowflakes, but like, why are they so desperate to get someone, signed in a week or two? A, and then B, like that's just not reasonable. Like, we all got lives and humans and families and whatnot. Like, that's just like not a reasonable timeline. And so I think in general, sort of being open and honest with people is not going to hurt you.
And I think, we all live in a small community, right? There's not that many trauma surgeons out there. So, the more open and honest you are, like, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot for your future, if you're, so you wouldn't lie to people, you don't have to show all your cards, but you don't want to necessarily, hold too much back either, where they think you're, dealing in bad faith because, you're going to go back out for another job, or that person might transfer into your department. And so keep that in mind as well.
Awesome. I think, there's another question. Any specific advice for emergency medicine trained surgical critical care fellows? This is actually a very interesting question because I'm at a program where there's a lot of EM trained surgical critical care fellows. How is the process different from the traditional surgical applicant?
So, I don't know if anybody on the panel, we're all surgeons, right? But my best friend's ER crit care. And so I know that not all ICUs want surgical critical care trained versus, medical critical care. So that's like the first thing when you look at, critical care jobs as an ER. And then most of the jobs are some sort of combo of ER and ICU time. And so you have to look at how much time you're going to do for your, how many ER shifts are you willing to do? How much time are you going to be in the ICU? How well are they going to communicate? And what are you going to be happy with? Like, do you hate the ER and you really want to be in the ICU? So you only want like 2 ER shifts a month? Or do you want a 50-50 split? That seems to be the most important thing, decision-making for like ER critical care.
Yeah, and I would just say like that you're highly marketable right now because, there's a lot of, especially acute care and trauma places that want more critical care coverage so that, more of their trauma surgeons can focus on just the trauma or not working every weekend.
Awesome. There's a request for Dr. Kelley's contact information. I think Bria might be typing that up as we speak. But Dr. Kelley, if you don't mind putting in your contact information at the end, just a reminder to this panelist. So this video is being recorded. It will be on the AAST Associate Membership website later on, archived, and it will also be on Trauma Doctors on YouTube as well too. So if you need it for future reference, or if you want to send a link to any of your friends down the road, all this content is being archived and being available for you. So I think that's it for questions. I do want to share my screen really quickly as we wrap things up.
There's a little question in the chat about tele ICU for surgical critical care trained surgeons. I don't have any experience with that, but I don't know if any of our other panelists do.
Yeah, I have not done it myself, but I know people who have. It feels to me like sort of like a hybrid of like some of the things about locums with some of the things about like intolerable Zoom meetings. My own personal bias is I really don't think you can be a super effective surgical critical care doctor like from a laptop computer 3,000 miles away, but it does serve a critical need that there just aren't enough intensivists. I think I would go into it, for all the things that all the other panelists have also said. Like, you want to know what that experience looks like, who works there, what's their experience, what do they do? For people who no longer work there, I would want their opinion, like why did they stop doing it? There are, I know, some systems where health systems will have some of their like main campus, so to speak, surge crit care faculty do like remote or tele ICU. So for example, the Penn system, at least when I was a student, and I think they probably still do it to some degree, the surge crit care faculty would sometimes take these sort of tele ICU shifts that were not like, I'm in Philadelphia, but I'm taking care of like septic patients in Wyoming. It was within that health system. If that's something that's if something that you're interested in, I would ask your future potential employer kind of if that's something that their health system needs or does.
Awesome. Any final questions? All right, if not, again, I'd like to thank our panelists for all their words of wisdom and also for the great questions. There's a lot of questions on this that, I certainly learned a lot from. Just a quick reminder, so 2 weeks from now is the virtual job fair. Please register online in advance. You'll also have the opportunity to complete your profile, put your picture, upload your CV in advance too. And with that, I hope all of you guys have a good afternoon, a good evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much. Bye.